All right, so let's begin. Hello, and my name is Sriram, and I'm currently speaking from Pune. And the subject that we have in front of us today is called Exploring the Dimensions of Living Beyond Career and Academics. By itself, an interesting topic, given the COVID, problem that we have everywhere. And I'm sure many of you must be concerned about your studies and your future work and career, etc. And one you may end up wondering why we've chosen a subject like this, but as we proceed, I'm hoping that this will get clearer. The intended audience for this subject is anybody who is a student, and typically between the ages of 18 and 30. That doesn't mean that anybody who's also older should not be watching this. I think all human beings somewhere or the other are students of life. And with this, let's just proceed. I'm going to be doing the presentation in 3 bits, about 35 to 40 minutes each. The first part is going to be the introduction. Before I get into the introduction, I would also like to state to you that what I have to share with you today is actually something that's pretty simple and very straightforward, but at the same time is very profound. It is an integral part of human living, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to see it that way as well by the end of this presentation. Let's move to the first slide. First things first, why am I even here? What am I doing here in front of this camera? So, a little brief introduction about myself and my journey in life so far. I went to a school called Loyola High School in the city of Pune, did my engineering in 1999, that is about 21 years from now, from a college called VIT. I got placed actually quite accidentally in a company called Fujitsu back then, and I started working, and then I went on to work in a company called Robert Bosch. Realizing that engineering or working in the software engineering field, as most engineers today end up doing, or many of us do, I decided I wanted to now do an MBA. So I prepared for the Common Admissions Test to institutes called the IIMs, the Indian Institutes of Management in the country. I did get a call from one or two of them, but before I reached the interview stage, I decided that I want to set my sights higher. So I decided to take up the GMAT for an MBA. While all this was happening, a lot of questions in me started arising. And one of the first questions was, I could really see that if I continue to work in the way that I did, I'm going to continue getting a good job and probably keep getting promoted, earn a lot of money, which is going to give me a good sense of material security, probably also yield some satisfaction, build up buy a house or build a house, maybe more than one house, and also have a dog. But what beyond that? So what I did was, in the turmoil of all these questions, I mean, this is the time when I'm like 26 and 27 or 25 years of age, and I think I'm like at the cusp of my career, and then suddenly I'm trying to wonder, what is it that I'm really doing on this planet, right? So what I did was I took a break from my job. I actually quit my job that I was working in. I was in a company called Bosch at that time, and I traveled for about a year and a half across the entire country. I traveled for to about 15 states in the entire country, trying to understand what people are living for, what the nature of poverty and things like that are. In the meanwhile, I also realized that my engineering education had not equipped me enough to be really able to understand life. So I decided to study a subject called anthropology and development, for which I ended up getting an admit from an institute called the London School of Economics, but I didn't even end up going there. I realized that the education itself may only provide me with some set of information, but not really yield me any real life experiences. Some of the important questions that were in front of me at that time were, what is more to life than studies and a career, be it in an NGO or, in the development sector or in a corporate. The second thing is, why are human beings even living? What really defines us as people? What is my role in society, given that there are so many problems around us that you see in the form of poverty and war and things like that? The other issue was also the rising economic problems. This was really troubling me, and I was wondering, what my responsibilities towards making our, natural environment safer was. And of course, a very large question that I ended up thinking about was, what are we even doing on this planet, right? What are human beings? What is the human race doing on this planet? The Earth spins around its axis, and it's also rotating around the sun. So what is our role in the larger scheme of things? So these are some of the questions that I was dealing with. And when I looked around, I found that most of my friends and colleagues were stuck in what you would want to call more or less the same rut. I'm not saying it's something wrong, but I could see that the promised satisfaction that was supposed to come to them, when you reach class 10, you're told that you can, the moment you, clear 10th standard, 10th grade with good marks, your life is going to be set. And then that story just continues when you reach class 12. And then when you reach, graduation, and then you have to settle into a job and make a career. and get some financial security, and then probably get married, and then look after the financial security of your wife and kids, and then of your ailing parents, and then one fine day you're going to find that there are people taking care of you as you end up growing old. So if you look at the entire spectrum in this, you find, or I found, that a lot of my friends had issues within their family, and that education itself had not equipped them to deal with these problems that they could see in family. The other thing that I could also see was they also had big problems in their workplace. So people had great jobs, they had a nice salary, cushy kind of perks, but if they didn't have a boss who was cooperative or that they could really look up to, it used to lead to a lot of problems. So I started realizing there's something really missing in this larger picture, and I decided to find out what really is happening, right? So you can also see, and I also found that people ended up taking to things like spirituality and religion later on in life. But there was no one thing that you could really do. It was all full of a difference of opinion. Somebody said something and somebody else really believed in something else. So it's really hard to say as a human being. So for example, when you study mechanical engineering, there's only one thing that you study, right? And mechanical engineering is the same no matter where you study it on this planet. But the moment you take to something like spirituality or religion or meaning of life kind of questions, you find that there are a lot of people trying to say a lot of things, but there's no one single universal thing that you can really study and pursue. In addition to that, one also sees that a lot of organized religion has challenges, explaining observed phenomena in the natural world. And traditionally, or historically, I should say, religion has really been at crosshairs with modern science and the way science really looks at reality and human beings. So in the middle of all this, when I was going through all these sets of questions and all this turmoil, I came across a new system of thought. It is called coexistential philosophy. So you can see it at the end here, right here. So we'll be talking a little about that. So I should clarify that whatever it is I'm going to share with you, I mean the understanding or whatever little bit of clarity that I have that I'm going to be sharing with you over the next hour or so, has essentially been derived from my understanding of this coexistential philosophy. We're not going to be talking about the philosophy itself, rather we're going to be seeing why it is necessary for us, you and me, and everybody else out there to be paying attention to or understanding something like this. So we're just going to be looking at the need to look beyond your academics and money and career, etc. All right, so let's move. So first things first, let's talk of the aspects of a human being. Right? So all of us are human beings. I'm a human being. You are a human being. What are the dimensions to human living? All right. So because this is not a two-way conversation, I'm just going to go ahead and prompt the answer to you. The first dimension of living is what we call as the material dimension of living. What do we mean what do I mean when I say the material dimensions of living? This is anything that is physical, chemical in nature. Let's take the first example, senses. Any sense that you feel from the body is to do with a material dimension of living, right? The good taste of coffee that you get, you can listen to good music, have a nice warm water bath, maybe feel, cold in the sun, by sitting in an air conditioning, etc. So anything that leads bodily sensations is to do with a material dimension of living. The other is also the things that you own. For example, I'm interacting with this laptop, right? Or I'm sitting on this chair. This is also something material in nature. So this is also to do with my material dimension of living. A lot of us also work with things that are material, which is a third point that you can see down there. And this work, if you see essentially, let's say you are a mechanical engineer and you work on a shop floor. So you're working on, an assembly line for cars, for example. So the car, the assembly line, and all the tools they're going to be using are also things that are material in nature. They're essentially derived from nature. So net, if you see the natural world that we live in, and that's the last point that you see down there, essentially houses everything material that we as human beings really interact with. Okay, this entire set of things, this entire set or system is called the material dimension of living, and you will see that every human being experiences this. There is no human being that does not feel cold or works with nature or interacts with nature in some manner. The second dimension of living, as has come up on your screen already, is called the behavioral dimension of living. So if you look at the difference between these two, the material dimension of living is everything that you work with something material, physical, chemical. The behavioral dimension of living is when you live with people, right? So you're doing something with human beings. All of us are born in some family, we grew up in some family, and then we go on to get married and have families of our own, including the families that we were born in. We also tend to, now kind of live in a larger family. For example, when you live in college, there is a larger family set of people that you live with. You have your friends, you have your classmates, your colleagues, your teachers, etc. And of course, you also have people outside in society. These are people that you meet once in a while. And there are also other human beings that you see all across the planet, and things that happen or not happen to these people also impacts us. For example, when we hear of a death somewhere or an untimely death, it doesn't leave us with a good feeling, right? So the behavioral dimension of living is basically the kind of connection that you have to another human being, which impacts us in many ways. So you can easily see that the behavioral dimension of living is also an equally integral or an even more integral part of a living than just the material dimension. Now, one question that comes to mind is, are these the only two dimensions of living, or is there anything more to it? And the answer is yes. The third and very important dimension of living is what we call as the intellectual dimension of living, right? In Hindi or in Marathi, you would call it bodhik. So this is a bodhik ayam of living. The behavioral dimension is a vyavharik ayam of living, and the material dimension of living is the bhautik ayam of living. What we typically assume to be living today is actually only doing something material and doing something behavioral. Most of us do not typically consider the intellectual part of living also as a part of living. But if you were to take a little pause and see, you will start realizing that this is actually more fundamental to you than any of these, because you spend more time with yourself than with anybody else. You spend more time with yourself than with anything material in nature. Even when you're thinking about buying something, you are actually spending time with yourself. When you're thinking of buying something and giving it to somebody, you are actually spending time with yourself. When you actually buy it and give it to someone is when you're actually interacting with someone, right? So the internal life of what you may want to call as your thoughts or your mind, myself, there are many words by which we can describe it, are essentially to do with your intellectual dimension of living. And these three put together, if you see, really make up human living. And now there is a fourth aspect. Before we go to the fourth aspect, when we look at the intellectual dimension of living, right, which is the bodhic aspect that I told you, it is characterized by desires and aspirations. So all of us have desires, right? So I too have a desire. For example, I had a desire to share something with all of you today, and hence propelled to do so. You may have a desire to go to a particular college. You may have a desire to get a particular job. You may have a desire to invent something new, to start something of your own, to change the world. All of these are desires that reside within us, right? So this is to do with the intellectual dimension of living. The material dimension of living is kind of really indicated by the satisfaction and pleasure that you derive from it. For example, when you have a good cup of tea or a good meal or something really tasty or a nice sweet dish or a nice, a pizza, you derive a satisfaction or pleasure from it, right? When you fulfill a desire, you derive a different kind of satisfaction or pleasure from it, right? So the things that happen to us within us when we are able to fulfill our desires and aspirations and thoughts, etc., are actually characterized by three different sets of words which I have shown here. The first one is called contentment. Contentment essentially means something that you feel within when you're able to achieve something that you desired for, right? When you are able to fulfill a desire that you have what is called as contentment. It's also called santosh. When you don't have conflicting thoughts about how you should be or how to interact with somebody, right, then it's called peace. For example, you are talking to me, but then you suddenly don't start liking something about me. Now that starts creating a conflicting situation within you, and you are, you've lost your peace of mind. So we typically say, I've lost my peace of mind. The third is when you're able to do things the way you thought you should be doing them, then it's called happiness. So there's a very small and very important distinction that we can draw right here, that when you interact with anything material, which means when you do anything with the five senses, you look at a nice scenery, you smell something nice, you feel or sense something nice, which could be hot, cold, nice, air conditioning, air, etc., right? you eat something nice, you taste something nice, all right, and you hear something nice. These are the five senses. Any input that you get from the five senses is essentially material in nature, and it gives a kind of happiness which is actually satisfaction or pleasure. And when you have a state of mind within, right, when you may be hot or cold, but you have a state of mind within in which you are able to fulfill what you set out to do, when you are able to fulfill the way you thought you should be thinking, when you fulfill the things that you wanted, then this is characterized by a different set of feelings, which is called contentment, peace, and happiness. So these are two different sets of experiences that every human being, no matter what their religion is, no matter what part of the world they're from, no matter whether they're male or female, irrespective of their education status, right? You can see that in the schematic in front of you, this has got nothing to do with your education status or any of these things. Every human being that you know and I know about and that we will know about or may have known essentially has these three dimensions of living and undergoes these three experiences. Now there is a fourth dimension of living, and I have kind of put that in a faded font, and it's called the spiritual dimension of living. And the reason I put it in a faded font is to not scare off some of you, because many of us are allergic or maybe allergic to the word spiritual, because there's so much happening in the world today under the name spiritual, right? People are changing clothes, they're opening big buildings and accumulating a lot of people, etc. But as far as we are concerned, the spiritual dimension of living essentially means just getting the fundamental answers, or the answers to our fundamental questions about who we are and what we're doing on this planet, right? And who we are as human beings and who we are as individuals, and what things really are like. And this definition, I must tell you, is not something that I've cooked up. I actually looked up the website called the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and that's what it says about the spirituality, right? So spirituality essentially means, or being spiritual essentially means, trying to understand the fundamental nature of oneself and the fundamental nature of everything else around us. So as far as the aspects of human beings are concerned, we can see that there are four aspects of our living, of every human being. One is the material dimension of living that all of us are very, very familiar with. Even a small child is familiar with this one. Then you have the behavioral dimension of living, in which you are interacting and doing or transacting with people in some manner. There is exchange of some kind of feeling and some kind of input and output. There is the intellectual dimension of living. This is basically me living within myself. And there is also a spiritual dimension of living, which we may or may not be aware of at this point in time, correct? But most of us, or many human beings, tend to have certain questions regarding themselves. So we're going to not focus too much on the fourth, or the spiritual dimension of living, which is why it's a little faded out. But what's important to understand from this is these four essentially make up the entire spectrum of a human being's life, irrespective of their education, etc. All right, and they are not separable. So you can't separate the material dimension of living from a human being. Every human being is going to have sensations. He is going to have something. He will do some work, and he is part of the natural world. Every human being interacts with some other human being, irrespective of whether they have a family or not. It could even be a fight. A fight is also an interaction with a human being. So every human being also has a behavioral dimension of living. Similarly, every human being compulsorily has an intellectual dimension of living. And as I said, as far as the spiritual dimension of living is concerned, some of us may be aware of, and many of us may not be aware of it. So let's proceed. Now, the question that comes to us, or comes to mind, is, out of these four dimensions of living, where is our focus, right? Where are you as an individual focusing? Where are your parents focused? Where are your friends focusing? Where are the movies focusing, right? Where are the newspapers focusing? Where are all the games focusing? So I think the answer is pretty straightforward. As far as education is concerned, if you look at it, we have subjects, one basic subject called science, which includes things like physics, chemistry, biology, maybe even zoology, etc. This is essentially, as far as education is concerned, is to do with a study of the natural world, correct? So this is to do with the material dimension of living. When you take science or a finding from science and you change it into something useful for a human being, it's then called technology. So technology essentially is I would say, the implementation of science to be able to fulfill some useful human need or some useful human purpose. Of course, you have a subject like geography, which is the basic, and maybe even geology, that studies the nature of the natural world. Then you have subjects that are to do with the humanities. You have subjects like history, civics, sociology, law. These are all to do with human behavior. right? So history basically tells you what the way human beings behave with each other in the past. Civics tells you how you should be behaving with people or conducting yourself in society today, right? Sociology kind of tries to talk about the mindset of people in society at a given point in time. And of course, law comes into action when two people have a problem behaving with each other. So you need law to come and kind of sort things out. When you get into a fight and you want to sort things out, that's when law comes into the picture. You then have subjects like psychology and the arts, which are to do with the intellectual dimension of living. I'm assuming most of you are engineers out there, so you probably didn't really study psychology. But for those of you who did, psychology essentially is studying the intellectual dimension of living and how it impacts the behavioral and the material dimension of living. And then, of course, you have a subject like philosophy, and maybe some of you took subjects in philosophy, which essentially deal with the fundamental nature of things, what the fundamental nature of a human being, etc. is. So this, in a very short and a very simple schematic, you can see the different subjects that we really have already studied as you went through school and college, and maybe knowingly or unknowingly. And so the next question that comes to our mind is, where are we focusing today? Which was the question that I put up on the slide. According to me, our entire focus today is basically only on the material dimension of living. Why do I say that? You look at anything that you do in science and technology, right? The end result of anything that you do in science and technology is to get something material in nature, all right? Even when you behave with people, even when you study history, civics, sociology, the end result is something material in nature. And what do I mean when I say that? We are basically looking at trying to earn money by studying this subject, correct? So I think this is a very simple distinction that we can all make, that no matter what you study science, technology, geography, etc., you finally put it to use in commerce. You are trying to earn some money by studying these subjects, and you're also trying to probably get other people earn money by studying these subjects. Of course, if you're studying commerce, you're studying money itself, so that's beyond, outside the question. Even when you're studying subjects that have to do with the behavioral dimensions of living, you are essentially then trying to earn some money out of it. As a lawyer, as a sociologist, as a historian, you're probably teaching somewhere, or you may end up, writing a book, but then you want to end up selling the book and then what? Make some money out of it. Similarly, we study psychology and the arts, and then finally the destination of all that is also commerce or money. Even something that is spiritual or philosophical in nature finally finds its destination in something material in nature. So if I were to answer that question for you, where is our focus today? Our focus today is really on money. No matter what we study, right, we are trying to finally take it to a destination that is to do with money. And the things that money can do is basically get this. It can get you something material in nature, and you can have a good sensation, a lot of comfort from it, and things like that, right? So this is, if you really look at it, these are the things that we're really focused on. If you look at, so that maybe the previous slide kind of give you a negative connotation, so I just want to put together a little slide that very quickly summarizes what's really gone well for us human beings today so far in our history. As far as material things in nature are concerned, you can see that we've really been able to unravel the laws of the natural world via science or the scientific method, right? So we understand physical and chemical phenomena and the external world or the external reality much better than we could a few hundred years ago. We've also gone into cosmology and space, so we also have kind of like a much better idea of where we are in the larger scheme of things and how large the larger scheme of things are, right? With the discovery of new galaxy clusters and universes, and even talk of multiverses, etc. We've of course made a lot of progress when it comes to technology, and if you essentially look at technology, it has yielded more comfort to us. So technology, using technology, we have the ability to do remote communication. You can do remote transmission. I can kind of talk to you without really being in front of you today. There's of course a lot of comfort, with the kind of fan and air conditioning and lighting and transport and things like that. We've also been able to achieve a lot in food security using technology, especially in agricultural science and also modern farm implements. And of course, we have a lot of advances in medical care, which incidentally we seem to have been quite unawares today, right? With the SARS-CoV-2, or what's called as the COVID-19 virus, right? So it's been nature has been able to create a bug that human beings are finding, taking time to solve. So yeah, so we've made advances in medical care, but in emergency care and diagnostics and things like that. When it comes to the behavioral dimension of living, a big question, and I put a question mark there, is are you really able to spend more time with family today? Right? With all the advances in science and technology and modern technology, etc., do you get more time or less time with your family? Right? That's a question. But some of the things that have gone well are we are able to see that right to education is a fundamental right for every human being. We are also looking at laws like clauses like the right to information, at least in some countries or democratic countries like India, maybe the United States, Canada, and many countries in Europe that really have a democratic system of governance. There are a lot of rights that are guaranteed to people that were not guaranteed maybe 100, 200, or even maybe in some cases even 75 years ago. Right? So there was a lot of racial discrimination. You can also see that there are a lot of rights. It's June 2020, and there's a lot of rights erupting in the United States around racial discrimination, things like that. But we've come up with the notion of a United Nations. So there's another good thing that has happened. At least the world leaders have got together and said we have to figure out how to be united. We probably can't say that we're already united today. Obviously, there's a lot of bickering that happens within the United Nations, but at least there is a notion of United Nations which wasn't existing before. So on the whole, if you see, people have been advocating the need for equality when it comes to human relationships. When it comes to the intellectual dimension of living, if I were to look at what's really gone well, there are really too many points to talk about there. We've got a lot of new theories around how the mind functions, but I don't think there is anything that's really good out there that you can really put to use. We've done a lot of work on learning stages and the methods of teaching, etc., to students. I don't know how much of that was really implemented in the college that you or school that you went to, but a lot of people have done a lot of good work there. And we also kind of today understand memory in a much better way than we did before because of our studied in the brain, and of course in subjects like cognitive sciences and neurosciences, etc. So that's another parcel where we've made some headway in the last 500 to 1000 years. When it comes to the spiritual dimension of living, the post spiritual dimension is still faded. Have we really made any progress in that dimension? Do we really understand who we are and what we're doing on this planet? Do you really understand yourself as a human being and what you should be or you're supposed to be doing with your living, and what your purpose of living is? I don't know. So that's really a question. But although there have been good things that have gone so well, and I spoke of the positive parts first, there are issues, right? We still have a lot of problems. And let's look at some of the problems in the same 4 dimensions of living, right? In the material dimension of living, you can see the first problem is the same sensation that gives you a lot of happiness or satisfaction also causes a lot of dissatisfaction. For example, you wanted to eat a pizza, and when the pizza is made nicely and it's hot, or let's say you wanted to eat a vada pav, and it was hot and tasty and the way you think it should have been, it gives you a sense of satisfaction. But when it's gone cold or it has too much salt and it wasn't available when you wanted to have it, it gives you a sense of dissatisfaction. So the changing nature of taste and sensation leads to what you would call as unfulfillment, which is the first point that I've put down there. The second is when it comes to things. So you may feel happy, like I have a nice Apple computer in front of me right now, but then there's also the fear that I'll lose it, right? There's also the fear that it'll fall off and break, or that somebody would steal it. So while you get some satisfaction by having things, it is also accompanied by the fear of losing it. As you earn money, you're also afraid that you may lose it at some point in time. There is also the fear of losing health along with wealth, which is a big fear that we're living with today, right? Everybody's wearing a mask when they're getting out. There is also the feeling of having less, and that's really called deprivation. So that's like a big problem that, an issue that still persists. What that essentially means is no matter how much money you have, or it doesn't matter, maybe it does. So let me rephrase that, right? Even though you have money, you could still have the feeling that you don't have enough, right? Because your benchmark of comparison is always changing. So, let's say you were earning 10, you're looking at somebody who's earning 12. You're earning 12, and then you're looking at somebody who's earning 15. You're earning 15, and then even though you're not looking at anybody who's earning more than you, you may still feel that I'd rather have 20 because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So there is this fear of the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen later on in life. So you want to make sure that you feel secure, right? And then, of course, there's this big problem about, around nature and the pollution that you can see in nature. I think I don't need to elaborate on that. Even as young students, I think you probably had these subjects back in school, but you just need to walk out in any Indian city today and you can feel and smell the pollution and see it, and you can see the resource depletion and the disappearing trees, right? So you can see this all across the world. Climate change is a reality. There's no point trying to deny it anymore, saying it's a cycle, and it's also very clear that it's also man-made. Right? So these are the sets of problems that we see in the material dimensions of living. I would, you should recollect that we first spoke of the positive side. I mean, the things that we've really gained in the material dimensions of living. These are the problems that we've landed in. The second is the behavioral dimension of living. Some of the issues that continue to persist here are pretty deep. So one is even within family, right? So amongst the people that you grow up with and the people that raised you, and amongst friends, there can be a sense of competition. A brother can compete against his own brother or sister, right? There can be jealousy even amongst siblings. There can be jealousy between husband and wife at times, right? There is all the peer pressure that you have to deal with when it comes to behavior. So you have the pressure to be able to own a nice phone. I don't know, maybe have a good picture on Facebook nowadays. I think that's kind of like the in thing. Wear a particular brand of shoes, make sure that your clothes are branded, make sure that you have the latest haircut in town. So a lot of peer pressure that all of you face, all of us face, from the people that are around us. So that's like a big problem that continues to persist. And I'm saying that is a problem because any kind of pressure actually causes us to lose our sense of peace in the intellectual dimension. So any pressure that comes to me from the outside actually upsets my balance within. And when the balance within me is upsetted, it makes me feel bad, right? And I don't want to feel bad. So that's like a big problem. That's something that I have to deal with. I have to understand, right? So there's also all the misunderstanding that takes place in the behavioral dimensions of living, right? You all the time, whenever there is an argument or somebody is upset because of something we said, you must have heard yourself saying, I actually didn't mean to say this, but I actually ended up saying that, right? Or that's not the way I meant it, taking it in the wrong way. So communication with people seems to be like a big deal, right? And you must be wondering why we should be talking about it at all. But imagine you have everything going well in the material dimension of living, right? But the person that you're actually working with is somebody that you do not gel with, right? That you are jealous about, or maybe they're jealous about you, or you have some argument. It's going to overcome any gain that you actually make in the material dimensions of living. Right? So let's say you are driving in a new car. You just bought a new car and you are really liking a long drive in a new car, and you end up fighting or having an argument with the person who's sitting next to you in that car. Correct? You will experience that. This has started giving you or yielding a sense of discomfort, and a lack of peace and discontentment within, although the pleasure from the car continues to come. So you can see that the behavioral dimension of living is equally, if not more important. And of course, if you look at society, some of the issues that persist, remember what we're talking about, are things like exploitation, one country trying to exploit the other. We've seen an ample example of that in the past few days. A lot of wars that could otherwise have been avoided. 20 good Indian soldiers lost their lives recently in a very unnecessary skirmish at the border. A lot of conflict that is taking place around the world, and it is hard to say whether these problems that you see in the behavioral dimension are really reducing with our advances in science and technology, and we'll see a little more of that in a bit. When it comes to the intellectual dimension of living, some of the issues that persist are, of course, all of us are beset with a lot of fears. I spoke with one of them, which is the fear of losing wealth. There is also the fear of losing life, the fear of losing position, the fear of losing one's respect, and so on and so forth. A lot of internal conflict and uncertainty that comes that faces us in life. For example, you want to get married and now you're very uncertain. Who do you get married to? Will that person be fine? Will I be able to spend the rest of my life with them? Should I first spend some time with them and stay together before I decide to go ahead and get committed to marriage? Should we have children after marriage? At what age should we have children? Which school should we put them to, right? What city should I live in? Should I take that loan? Should I not take that loan? What did that person mean? Will I lose my job? All this kind of uncertainty that really lives within a person. So you can easily see that the intellectual dimension of living is a very vast area. It is actually where we spend most of our lives within ourselves. A lot of frustration that comes from not being able to fulfill desires and aspirations that we have. And also ego is a big problem that I've put up there. Ego essentially means when you I'm going to take a quick time check. Okay. So ego essentially means is when you have ended up over evaluating yourself, right? So then people don't like you, people don't like us when we think no end of ourselves and when we don't listen to them, right? So in any behavior, if you see, we want that somebody listens to what we have to say, correct? And if the person doesn't listen to what we have to say, then it takes us off. It creates a problem, it creates a conflict, a gharshan, right? A rubbing in that particular relationship. Some of us also go through the feeling of depression, right? So the feeling of depression can come when you feel that you're not good enough, you're not as good as the people around you. And there can be many various reasons for depression, right? One of the reasons for depression is you don't get as much marks as the people around you. Maybe you can't run as fast as your neighbor, right? You can't eat as much as them. You don't have a big enough house. You don't get an award like they did and things like that. You can't earn enough money, or you're not earning enough money, as much money as they are, and things like that. So depression is also a big problem that a lot of people end up with. And of course, there are all the unsolved queries and curiosities that we have around who we are, around what exists, how is it, and what is the self. This is basically the definition of the spiritual thing that I told you that I got from the Stanford website. So, we have all these unsolved queries and curiosities regarding ourselves. So, if you look at this single slide with all the problems thrown in, it doesn't seem much, but it's actually also quite a lot. So, you can easily see that even if you make a lot of progress in the material dimension, so you can do a lot of science and technology, you can earn a lot of money, buy as many cars as you want, buy a fat sofa, sit on it, eat as much as you want. You can't eat as continue to eat that way because you have the fear of losing health after some time. It is beset with problems, right? The first problem that you end up with is you have the fear of losing wealth and health. The second now problem that you're facing with is fear of losing the balance on this planet. Right? What if the rains don't come this year? You won't have enough to eat. With the rising levels of pollution, you're afraid that we're going to die prematurely. And there are a lot of statistics out there that you can actually read upon that people have put together. So no matter what progress we've made in the material dimension of living, and there have been some advantages to that I spoke of in the previous slide, you can see that it has also created its set of problems. But irrespective of the kind of progress that we've made in the material dimensions of living, which means you can get good marks, do very well in your career, earn a lot of money, and earn a big house, maybe build a big house, build many houses, it's not going to solve the problems in your behavioral dimension of living, correct? And that is also not going to solve the problems that are within you. And this, I think we don't need to look far. Just look at the newspapers. We look at people who were seemingly very successful, owned big companies, who ended up lying or breaking some work ethic and ended up going to jail. You have people who committed suicide, right? So I believe he was a very good person. The owner of one of India's, or probably the largest coffee chain in this country, committed suicide because of monetary issues and depression. Just day before yesterday, an actor in Bombay hung himself. Very young person, I believe, also very talented man who did well in physics, etc. Ended up killing himself because he was depressed, right? So if you look at items 2, 3, and 4, no matter what progress we make in the material dimension of living, we find that there is little to no progress in these 3 dimensions of living, points 2, 3, and 4. And you can easily see that these are more fundamental to us than this. That doesn't mean that one is not important, but 2, 3, and 4 are really important. And you can also see that all the unhappiness that you have is essentially to do with these 4 dimensions of living only. You have some unhappiness too because you don't have something material, or you couldn't do something the way you thought you should be doing materially. You had a problem with another human being. That's the second kind of problem. The third is you're not able to sort out something within yourself, right? You're uncertain, you're depressed, you have ego, you get angry very fast, you're unsure, you can't take decisions. So this is a third source of happiness. And like I said, for some of us, there could be a fourth source of happiness, a fourth source of unhappiness, which is essentially not having answers to, who I am and what exists and what things really are like, right? So you can see that these problems in these 4 aspects, the kind of impact all of us, and these problems are essentially due to a lack of answers, correct? And so the unhappiness that you see is really in these 4 areas, which is why understanding or kind of even dealing with areas 2, 3, and 4 really becomes important, which is why we are doing this or having this conversation in the first place. Interestingly, in the name of spirituality, there is a lot of problem that you also see in the form of religious conflict. Correct. So I needn't elaborate on that. You can see it in the West Bank, you can see it in Africa, you can see it in Europe, in India, in Asia, in maybe also in America. A lot of religious conflict that is happening in the name of spirituality or in the name of what exists, and how is it and what the nature of the self, etc. are. So these kind of issues net continue to persist for us as individuals and also as a society, right? So so that kind of brings us to the end of part one of what I wanted to share. So to quickly summarize, we have 4 dimensions of living: the material, behavioral, intellectual, and spiritual. These are integral to every human being, irrespective of who they are and what their education, their religion, gender, etc. is. Our state of happiness and unhappiness is to do with 3 or maybe even 4 of these dimensions of living. You can't separate any one of them. You can't say, I will not behave from tomorrow. Correct. You will have to go and tell somebody that you're not going to be behaving. So you'll still end up talking to a human being. So these 4 are really integral, inseparable aspects of our living. All right. And while we've had a lot of good progress in the material dimension of living, when it comes to the behavioral, the intellectual, as well as the spiritual dimension of living, our education and our society and science and technology has not been able to make much headway in areas 2, 3, and 4. And we can see very easily by scrutinizing yourself a little bit over the period of a day or maybe a few days. When you start observing yourself from this point of view, you will see that items 2 and 3 or domain 3 is actually very, very important. In fact, it is based on how you think that you actually behave with people. It is based on how you think or how you assume that you actually do something material with nature. For example, if you look at a tree as a source of income, you're going to cut it. If you look at a tree as something that you want to protect because it's good for the environment, you're going to try and save trees. So how you think is how you are going to live. So if you're going to go ahead and live your life, which you are and which you're probably also already living, understanding these 4 becomes really important. Correct. So which brings us to the need for understanding, which is our next session. So with that, I will stop this session and we'll continue.